The meeting hadn't even started when the doors opened. Two security officers walked in first, then Adaugo Okonkwo. She didn't greet
You
anyone.
might want to
She
read
dropped a
page
thick
12.
file on the table, looked straight at the man sitting beside her, her husband, her co-founder, the man she had crossed continents to love, and said, "You might want to read page 12." The room went silent. She sat down, she opened her laptop, and she destroyed him, quietly, completely, in front of every person he had ever tried to impress. And when it was over, when the documents had been served, and the man who had shared her bed for 4 years was being walked out of the building he had helped her build, Adaugo Okonkwo picked up her pen, crossed one item off her agenda, and moved on to the next. That is the kind of woman she was. But to understand what it took to sit in that chair that morning with that kind of stillness, you have to go back to a midnight laboratory in Seoul, to a love story that was supposed to be a miracle, and to the exact moment a man looked at everything his wife had built and decided to burn it down from the inside. This is the story of Adaugo and Dukhwan, and nothing about it is what you expect. Adaugo was not supposed to be in Seoul. She was supposed to be in Lagos, running her mother's fabric shop on Allen Avenue. The road already laid out for her, narrow and familiar. But Adaugo had never been the kind of woman who walked on roads that other people built. She won a chemistry scholarship at 23, packed 2 suitcases, borrowed 40,000 naira from 3 different aunties who each thought they were the only one lending her money, and boarded a plane to a country she had never visited. Her mission: fuse Korean botanical science with African skincare traditions to create something the beauty industry had never seen. Products made for deep melanin-rich skin by someone who actually understood it. Dukhwan Choi found her at midnight in a university lab 3 months later. She was testing a serum on her own forearm, muttering equations in a mix of Igbo and Korean that made no sense in either language. He was the lab supervisor. The lab was closed. He was supposed to ask her to leave. He sat down instead, asked what she was making. 6 hours later, neither of them had moved. They were opposite in the best way. He was methodical where she was instinctive. She was visionary where he was precise. They fell in love the way impossible things happen slowly, then all at once. They married 3 years later, Igbo traditional rites in Oka, Korean Pibik ceremony in Seoul. Fusion Beauty International launched 18 months after that. Within 2 years, Vogue Korea. Within 4, a billion-dollar company. Within 5, 3 billion. They were on every magazine cover. The Afro-Korean power couple who rewrote the rules of the beauty industry. Everyone said so, over and over again. And that, as it turned out, was precisely the problem. The first sign was the phone. Dukhwan had always left it face up, open, unbothered, for years, no reason to wonder. Then one evening in October, she walked into the kitchen and he flipped it face down. 1 second, he probably didn't even realize he'd done it. But Adaugo was not the kind of woman who missed small things. She said nothing, she watched. Late nights came next. Vague explanations. Investor meetings she didn't recognize. Partners whose names weren't on any list she'd ever built, and she had personally built every list this company ran on. Then her assistant Myung walked into her office on a Friday and placed a single photograph on the desk without saying a word. Dukhwan, a rooftop restaurant in Itaewon, a young Korean woman across from him, his hand over hers, the kind of tenderness that doesn't come from a first meeting. Adaugo looked at the photograph for 11 seconds. Then she placed it in her desk drawer, looked up at Myung, and said 3 words very quietly. "Find out everything." Myung had been waiting for exactly those words. She left without a sound. What came back 10 days later was not just evidence of an affair. It was evidence of something far worse. The woman's name was Soo-hyun, a junior researcher at a biotech firm, one of Fusion's newest competitors, a company that had launched 8 months earlier with products bearing an unsettling resemblance to formulas Adaugo and Okonkwo had developed in their private lab. Formulas that lived on encrypted servers only two people could access: Adaugo and Okonkwo. Myung had pulled 14 months of financial records through the company's forensic accounting team, a team that reported exclusively to Adaugo. She found transfers, small ones first, then larger. Over 14 months, $600,000 had moved from accounts Okonkwo managed into three holding companies. All three held equity stakes in Soo-yoon's employer. He wasn't just cheating. He was using company money to fund a competitor his girlfriend worked for, leaking research that had lived in Adaugo's mind before it ever touched a laboratory. Building, behind her back, a business designed to eat Core Fusion from the outside. He hadn't just cheated on his wife. He had tried to steal her life's work. Adaugo read every page of the report that Sunday evening, a cup of pepper soup going cold beside her, not one tear. She had already cried, once, the night she first saw the photograph, alone in the bathroom, shower running loud enough to cover the sound, sitting on the floor for exactly 20 minutes. 20 minutes, that was all she allowed. Then she stood up, dried her face, and became the CEO again. Most people would have screamed, confronted him, called a lawyer and let the chaos take over. Adaugo called her mother. Mama Okonkwo had once told her, when a snake enters your house, you don't scream and run out the door. You close the door quietly, and then you get the machete. Adaugo closed the door. For 3 weeks, she moved through her life as if nothing had changed, slept beside him, attended meetings with him, held his hand at industry events while photographers captured the power couple the world believed they still were. Underneath it, she was building a case. Her legal team, separate from his as it had always been, because Adaugo had insisted on independent counsel the day Core Fusion Incorporated and Okonkwo had found it slightly hurtful, spent 3 weeks assembling something airtight. Every transfer, every IP timeline, every shell company mapped to its equity position. Her lead attorney reviewed the full package and said, "We can destroy him financially, professionally, and criminally with this." Adaugo said she knew she wasn't going to do all three. She was going to do something worse. In public, in the boardroom, without raising her voice once. The Sunday before Monday was the longest day of her life. She woke at 4. He was asleep beside her, breathing slowly. Unbothered, she lay in the dark for 2 hours. She thought about the night they danced at their wedding in Oka, about the year their first product failed, sitting on the floor of their small Hongdae apartment, eating ramyun she'd seasoned with ground crayfish from home, laughing, because they had each other, and the failure felt temporary. She thought about that version of Okonkwo. Then she thought about the man who had flipped his phone face down on her kitchen table. They were not the same person. She got up, dressed in a custom Ankara blazer in deep burgundy, gold earrings her mother had given her the day she defended her thesis. She stood in the mirror for a long moment. She looked like what she was, a woman who had already won and was simply coming in to collect. She went downstairs and cooked jollof rice at 6:30 in the morning, the real kind, smoky base, bay leaves, Scotch bonnets, because cooking had always been how she steadied herself. Okonkwo came down at 7, kissed her cheek, ate 2 full plates, said it was incredible. She smiled, she watched him eat, and she felt something she hadn't expected. Not anger, not grief. Clarity, cold, complete, and permanent. She was ready. The meeting was called for 9. Quarterly review, routine, nothing unusual. 12 people around the table, 7 board members, the 2 co-founders, the CFO, the chief legal officer, and one new face nobody recognized, Jin Park, Adaugo's attorney, leather briefcase on the table in front of her. Okonkwo leaned over and asked who she was. Adaugo said he would find out. The first 40 minutes ran normally. Financials exceptional, product launches. Duck Hwan presented the R&D pipeline with his usual confidence. He was good at his work. He had always been good at his work. That had never been the problem. Then Adaugo said there was one more agenda item. She stood up. The room shifted the way it always did when she stood, a specific settling, like the air before something arrives. Everyone sat up slightly straighter. She clicked once, the screen behind her loaded. A formal review of executive conduct and fiduciary responsibility. First slide, bank records, Duck Hwan's name, the shell companies, the amounts. 14 months of transactions in clean, precise tables. His face didn't break immediately. He was skilled at composure. But Adaugo had been studying his face for weeks, and she saw the exact moment the seam gave. A jaw tightening, a narrowing of the eyes, less than a second. She kept going. Second slide, the IP documentation, proprietary formulas, development dates. The dates identical compounds appeared in the competitor's product line. Forensic chemistry analysis, 7 separate products. Third slide, the corporate structure, shell companies, equity positions, the competitor's full funding chain, one name at the center circled in red. Fourth slide, one line. Total estimated damage to Cora Fusion Beauty International, USD 47.2 million. The room was completely still. One board member had his hand pressed flat over his mouth. Duck Hwan said her name. She held up one hand, not yet. She spoke for 18 minutes, precisely, without emotion, every counterargument addressed before it could be raised. When she finished, she nodded to Jin Park. Jin Park slid a document down the table. Adaugo said, "That is your immediate removal as Chief Technology Officer and co-founder, effective 9/47 this morning. Your access to all systems has already been revoked. Security is in the hallway. The second document is a civil lawsuit. The third is the FSC referral. You have 14 days to respond through your own counsel." A pause. She said, "I would like you to leave my boardroom now." He didn't shout, didn't challenge the documents. He knew what he was looking at. He picked up the papers, straightened his jacket, looked at her. For one fraction of a second, something moved across his face, not guilt, not shame, but something worse than both. The recognition of an irreversible loss, not of the company. Of her. Then he walked out. Security was waiting. His things had already been boxed. They walked him to the elevator and waited until the doors closed. In the boardroom, nobody spoke for almost a full minute. The veteran board member lowered his hand from his mouth and asked, almost in a whisper, "How long have you known?" She said, "Long enough." He nodded, asked what she needed. She told him, precisely. New CTO, a woman she'd been grooming for 18 months. Legal hold on all disputed assets. Investor statement ready to go within the hour. She had already briefed the 3 largest institutional investors the Friday before, in confidence, so nobody would be blindsided. She had thought of everything, left nothing to chance. Because this was her company, built by her mind and her refusal to be told she didn't belong, and she was not going to let it burn because a man she loved had mistaken her trust for weakness. 3 days after Duck Hwan was removed, Adaugo's private phone received a message, an old personal line almost nobody had. It was from Soo-yeon. It said, "I think you and I need to talk. I'm not your enemy. I was his victim too." Every instinct said, "Don't open this door." She opened it. They met at a quiet cafe and sat on 2 days later. Adaugo arrived first, ordered jujube tea, waited. When Soo-yeon walked in, she wasn't what Adaugo had expected. Young, visibly carrying something heavy she had finally decided to set down. She said, "I didn't know he was married until 6 months in." The silence between them was enormous. When she found out, she had tried to end it. Duck Hwan told her the marriage was a business arrangement, that he was staying for the company but it was already over between them. She was 26 years old and she believed him, because she wanted to, and because love makes the version of the story someone needs you to accept very easy to accept. She had voice messages, emails, documented conversations showing exactly what Duck Hwan knew and when. She had already sent them to her own lawyer. She was not there to protect him. Adaugo looked at this young woman across the table, used as a tool, handed a lie, only now beginning to understand the shape of what had happened to her, and felt something she had not expected. Not forgiveness, not friendship. Compassion, the clear-eyed kind. The kind that comes from recognizing there was more than one person in this story who was deceived by the same man. She told Soo-yeon to have her lawyer contact Jin Park. Everything she had would matter to the civil case. Soo-yeon's eyes filled with tears. Adaugo reached across the table and placed her hand over hers, just briefly. She said, "It is not your fault that he chose to be who he is." Then she finished her tea, put on her coat, and walked back out into Seoul exactly as she had arrived. Unbroken. 2 weeks later, Duck Hwan sent a handwritten note to the apartment, not through lawyers, through a mutual friend, the one channel she hadn't thought to close. He asked for 1 hour, said he had things to say that had nothing to do with the legal case, said he wasn't asking for anything, just needed her to hear him. First instinct, no. Second instinct, also no. She said yes, because she had always been a woman who faced things directly, and because some part of her understood that to fully close this chapter, she needed to sit across from him without armor. He talked for a long time. About the weight of the Choi name, his father's expectations, the pressure always to be the architect and not the co-pilot. For years it had been manageable, Cora Fusion was both of theirs and he had been proud. Then a journalist published a profile and called it Adaugo's empire. Not their company, Adaugo's. He said that word, empire, had lodged in his chest like a splinter he couldn't reach. He had started to feel like he was disappearing from the story, like he would end up a footnote in someone else's legend. He said, "I was so afraid of being erased that I did the one thing that made my erasure inevitable." Adaugo listened. Then she said, "I know what it is to be afraid of being erased. I built this company because every room I walked into told me I didn't belong. I have fought that fear my entire life. The difference is that I never used that fear as a reason to betray the person standing beside me." He had nothing to say to that. There was nothing to say. She walked him to the door, said not unkindly, "I hope you find something to build that is genuinely yours. I mean that, but it will not be connected to me." She closed the door, stood in the hallway for one moment. Then she went back to her desk and returned 17 emails. There was still a $3 billion company to run. The civil case settled 18 months later. Every misappropriated cent returned, plus damages. His shares surrendered below market value. A non-compete across South Korea, Nigeria, and the African Union. The criminal referral stayed active. Soo-yeon's employer dissolved within 6 months. The stolen research it had been built on no longer propping it up. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday. Adaugo was on stage in Lagos when the notification came through, addressing 300 people, wearing gold, completely in command. Her phone buzzed once. She glanced at it, final decree of divorce. She put it back in her pocket and kept speaking. That night she called her mother. Mama Okonkwo said, "EDMMA. It is well. You are not the kind of tree that falls when the storm passes through. You are the kind that grows stronger in the aftermath." Adaugo said she knew. She also said she was allowed to grieve. The man she had believed Duck Hwan was had been real to her, even if the reality behind him had not. She was allowed to mourn that. Her mother said, yes, and when you are done mourning, you build. She was done mourning in about 3 weeks. She built for 3 years. 3 years, 2 months, and 17 days after Duck Hwan walked out of the boardroom, Cora Fusion received an acquisition offer. One of the largest luxury conglomerates in the world, French, 80 years of history, a portfolio with some of the most prestigious names in global beauty. $8 billion. The industry held its breath for 48 hours. Adaugo declined. Her public letter said, Cora Fusion belongs to no conglomerate. It belongs to the women it was made for in Lagos and Seoul, in Nairobi and Busan, in Accra and Incheon. We are not for sale. We are for them. Instead, she launched the Cora Fusion Foundation, funding African women in STEM, cosmetic chemistry, and biotechnology, 40 scholars, full funding, lab access, mentored by Adaugo personally. The launch was in Abuja. Every major outlet from Lagos to Seoul to Paris covered it. At the podium, she said, the most dangerous thing I ever did was let someone else's fear of my greatness become a mirror in which I almost doubted myself. I am not what was done to me. I am what I chose to build after. The room stood. They stood for a long time. Duck Hwan eventually built something of his own, small, a modest biotechnology consulting firm, clean, about a dozen clients. He gave one interview. A journalist asked what he had learned. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I learned that envy of someone you love doesn't destroy them. It destroys you. And by the time you understand that, you've already burned down the most extraordinary thing that ever happened to you. The journalist asked, do you regret it? Every single day. Adaugo read the interview in the back of a car on the way to a board meeting in Lagos. She read it once, put the phone down, looked out at the city. Not satisfaction, not triumph. Closure, the permanent, unshakable kind that doesn't need anything attached to it. She arrived at her meeting, walked in, 12 faces looked up. She sat at the head of the table and said, let's get to work. There is a particular kind of woman who does not break when the ground gives way. She doesn't shatter. She doesn't beg. She doesn't make her survival conditional on an apology from the person who caused the damage. She sits on the floor of her shower for 20 minutes. And then she gets up. Adaugo Okonkwo loved completely and trusted entirely and built her world around a partnership that turned out to be something other than what she believed. That is not weakness. That is love. The mistake was his. The loss was his. The permanent, irreversible loss of a woman whose capacity to love was matched only by her capacity to rise. He looked at her greatness and chose to fear it. She chose as she always had, from the day she packed 2 suitcases with borrowed money and a vision that lit her from the inside to build. And build. And build. If this story hit you, if something in Adaugo's refusal to let betrayal become her ending landed somewhere real, I want you to do 3 things before you go. Hit subscribe, because this channel exists for exactly these stories, the ones about women who rise when everything around them says fall. You don't want to miss what's coming next. Hit like 1 second. It puts this story in front of someone who might need it today. And drop a comment. Tell me which moment stopped you cold. The boardroom, the jollof rice, the cafe in Insadong, the 8 billion decline, the 3 words she said to Myung. I read every single one. And if you have your own story of betrayal, of rebuilding, of choosing yourself when collapse would have been so much easier, leave it below. Because Adaugo's story matters. But so does yours. Stay with us. The next story is already waiting.